start of this question seems appropriate to start with, given that we're in a college. It's from Nicola Davis. I don't know if Nicola can remember the question she wrote, or near enough word for word, or whether you'd rather me read it out.
Just for a sweet in my
Oh, that's a good excuse, if nothing else.
I've swallowed it. So I'm quite happy to ask the question.
Great.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, being in an educational establishment, I just wanted to know what the panel's commitment was to continue to subsidise HE tuition fees for our students, and also is there a commitment from the panel to also continue for our post-16s to subsidise and support education maintenance allowance?
That's great. Thanks very much for the question. Nicola, very pertinent, because a lot of that falls under the Welsh Government or Welsh Assembly's powers. Perhaps if we start the opposite way around this time, start with yourself, Mark, and work backwards, that would be great.
Good. To start the other way then, on the EMA, we would like to keep EMA. I know what it does in terms of supporting people with participation, but also, frankly, making people's lives more productive and giving people opportunities. And I think if we were to lose it, it would make education less attractive compared to work. And I just think people investing in their education at that time of life is likely to yield returns for them, but also for wider society later on. On tuition fees, UKIP's policy is twofold. Within Wales, we want to abolish fees for the STEM subjects. So Welsh domiciled students studying at Welsh universities, we would abolish fees for STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths subjects. We would pay for that by changing the system for Welsh domiciled students studying in England. And from there, from September 2017, we would move to the system that they have in England, where there would be loans rather than grants for the full fees charged by English universities, but most of that money reinvested in abolishing fees for STEM subjects within Wales.
Why just the STEM subjects, Mark, just out of interest? Why focus on them? What about the arts subjects that are arguably a bit of both, a bit of science, a bit of art? Why concentrate on those particular subjects?
Because we believe the returns to STEM subjects for the wider economy are higher, and we are very concerned by the lack particularly of British students, a number of international students come in particularly at the graduate levels for STEM subjects, but we think we are weak in those areas, and I think there has been some shift for students towards STEM subjects, but we would like to see that accelerate, and we think for Welsh universities, if they are able to invest in those STEM subjects and to increase both the teaching and the research in those areas, then that would lead to big gains for employers and in terms of research and development and all the knock-on benefits for Wales. So it's partly for students, but it's also for the Welsh economy we want to do that.
We'll leave it there just for the time being. Trying to keep things as tight as I possibly can, because we've got a big panel, lots and lots of questions. Rhianon, if you could go next, just to remind you of the question. What are the commitments for addressing or subsidising higher education and a commitment to support EMA to post-16 students in Wales?
Okay. Firstly, I would like to say that Welsh Government's commitment to continuing with the educational maintenance allowance, in contrast to England, is one key difference between us and those in the Conservative Party and those that would be likely to support them in any coalition government come May the 5th if Labour is not successful. It's easy to have fine words on a platform. It's much harder when you're in government to be able to carry those out. And I am very happy to say that our manifesto pledges around education have been kept in terms of attainment, improvement, etc. In terms of the question in itself, yes, of course, we're going to be keeping the educational maintenance allowance post-16. It is a key driver and one of the key things that I feel very passionately about in being able for education to be accessed by everybody. It is an absolute travesty that this is not happening in England. In terms of higher education, absolutely, we've spent £200 million so far in terms of higher education, and that is going to continue. Our commitment to young people in growing the skills that businesses need, vocational and academic, is absolutely key, and that goes hand in glove with our apprenticeships programme, which probably may come up at a different point.
What about tuition fees?
In terms of tuition fees, quite frankly, we in Wales know that we will be supporting on all levels that our Welsh students are better off than English students. We are not going to go over to a system of loans, and our students at this moment in time are £22,000 better off than those in England, and that is a very firm dividing line between us and England, and that must continue.
Thank you very much. We will go to Brendon de Cruz next. Again, just to remind you of the question, Brendon, your commitments for subsidising higher education in Wales, and will your party commit to support EMA for post-16 students here?
Yeah, I'll start with the subsidies for further education. I mean, definitely, EMA needs to be there. The further education sector has been absolutely ravaged in recent years in terms of the way in which cuts have been implemented. Certainly things like VAT and others that you wouldn't think would be applied have been applied to FE, and we need to do something to make sure that their funding streams are stable. So yes for EMA. I used to be a head of department at University College North Newport, which is now University of South Wales. So I know a little bit about the kind of the funding for university side of things. And certainly the subsidies that the Welsh Labour government are using, a lot of that money is actually ending up in English universities in the way in which it's currently working. As Liberal Democrats, what we'd like to do is to actually turn it around a little bit and to think about putting money in the pockets of students in terms of their maintenance. That seems to be the kind of the area that people particularly find difficult. So we would bring forward a student living support grant by scrapping the subsidies, bearing in mind that they'll take out their loans and they'll pay that back over a much longer period of time. Obviously, when Liberal Democrats talk about tuition fees, it may raise an eyebrow or two, but we really do believe that we've thought this one through, and we think that maintenance is a much better way in which we can fund education, making sure that our universities have the money to deliver the sorts of courses that they really need to.
Next we'll go for David Reid, if that's all right.
Thanks. Just on the EMA, I think EMA is a vital support for working class young people to get them through college. It's the extra step that gets them through there. I was surprised to hear that Mark supported it actually, because of course he was part of a Conservative government in England that abolished EMA.
One of the 6 Conservative MPs who are actually against the big rise in tuition fees.
And consequently, of course, it has blighted the prospects for a whole generation of young people in England, and it's something we should fight to defend. And it's to the credit, actually, of the Welsh Labour government that they kept it. Unfortunately, to the discredit of the Welsh Labour government, they also promised to disincorporate the FE colleges, in other words, bring them back into public control, and they didn't carry through with that promise, which I think is a pity. I think they should be brought back under local authority control rather than being independent organisations that basically can do what they like, both in terms of the college itself, but also in terms of the staff. In terms of the HE,
Do local authorities have the expertise, do you think, David? Because
Well,
we've seen some examples of local authorities not doing as well as they should have when it comes to education, higher and further education, in this area and elsewhere.
they always did. The LEAs were the best way of ensuring that the local communities had control over their own education. Now, there is no way for people in this community to control what happens in this college. And it should be under the control of the local communities through local democracy. And it worked well in the past. I can remember this college 30 years ago, and I've been in here a few times. It's always been a good college. And it would be better under public control, under the control of the local community. In relation to HE, I think it's really important that we do continue to subsidise the fee grant. And I completely disagree with the idea that it should only be the wealthy students can afford to do the arts and the humanities, because they're not going to be subsidised by basically only the rich should be able to afford to do the things that matter. And what about librarians? Aren't they important? Of course they're important.
Thanks very much, Steve. Next, David Bartollotti for the Green Party. Your commitment to higher education, I think I even maybe lumped tuition fees in with this as well, but I guess it's the same kind of area, and it's been a hot topic over the last kind of decade or so. Your commitments for subsidising higher education and support for EMA for post-16 students. Pippa.
How can we afford not to educate our young people? Greens are very, very clear on this. I mean, of course we would keep the EMA, but the cuts to higher education just recently have been devastating. We'd actually do something a little bit different. We'd roll up the budget for HE and FE together. We don't want any poor relations. We want that budget to be shared equally. We believe in lifelong learning anyway. But already the fees are too high. The Greens would support and will, and have actually in our manifesto, a pledge for all Welsh students studying in Wales to pay no tuition fees.
How do you pay for that? Where's that costed from?
Well, it's obviously an aspiration, and I'm not pretending that we're going to be running the government. But I am telling you that on the proportional part of the ballot that you have in this upcoming election, that is the regional list, there is a very good chance of getting smaller parties elected, and there's a very good chance of getting Greens elected. And it's important for you to know what we stand for and how we will vote and how we will promote you in South East Wales. I also want to say that I'm not surprised that UKIP are promoting STEM subjects, science in particular. As a party of climate change deniers, I think there's a lot of science that they have to learn.
Okay, thanks very much, Pippa. Steffan Lewis from Plaid Cymru.
Yeah, Plaid Cymru is also committed to maintaining the EMA. As far as higher education and tuition fees, I mean, I'm sure a lot of us on the panel here disagree with anybody having to pay anything for education at whatever level it is, and Plaid Cymru opposed the tuition fees when they were originally introduced in the 1990s. However, with the situation we have now across the UK, what is becoming even more entrenched is that as England goes in one direction of marketisation of education, it means that we have got tough decisions to make here. And it means that, as far as Plaid Cymru is concerned, we would like to offer Welsh students returning to Wales from studying in England, or Welsh students who study in Wales, we would offer them a debt write-off of their tuition, of their student loans, in return for them coming here to return to work and to pay into the system and help us build a successful Welsh economy. And I'd just like to touch quickly as well on further education, because this is an area that has taken a huge hit in recent years, and it worries me greatly because adult education courses in particular, part-time courses especially, have been slashed. And in this time of economic change, when people have been made redundant, where jobs are very insecure, people need to be able to quickly retrain to get back into the labour market. And if we don't have part-time and adult education courses available to upskill people, it is very, very difficult for people to get out of that cycle of unemployment if they hit hard times.
Is that a red line, as they call it, for Plaid Cymru, the funding, perhaps reversing some of the cuts that have been made to higher education, to part-time courses, that kind of thing, because of the budgetary pressures over the last few years? Is that something that wouldn't be negotiable if we were looking at some kind of coalition for yourself?
Well, I'm not going to talk about coalitions, and not a single vote has been cast in this election yet. So every party here in front of you is putting forward a manifesto for you to vote on. I'm not going to take anything for granted in this election, and neither should any other party in terms of the outcome. All I can say is what a Plaid Cymru government would introduce, and our commitment to further and higher education is as I've explained, and it's up for other parties to discuss what their priorities are.
Thanks very much, Steffan. And last but not least, Elizabeth Stein for the rest of the circle.
Fee grants, we have taken into account the recent review by Professor Diamond, which pointed to the current system in Wales as being unsustainable and in actually not necessarily giving the right type of funding to students. What we are proposing is a rent rebate scheme that would replace the tuition fee grants that are only paid back once you're earning over a certain amount. The National Union of Students has come out and said that actually rent costs, living costs, are more of a barrier to accessing higher education than tuition fees, which, as I say, are only paid back once you're earning a certain amount anyway. So we've listened to that, and we are proposing a fully costed rent rebate scheme, which which would cost about £75 million a year, compared to the £264 million that the tuition fee grants are due to be costing the Welsh Assembly in 2015 to 16.
Is it going to save some money on tuition fees in terms of changing that system as it stands at the moment? In terms of educational maintenance allowance, it's your policy to get rid of that at the moment, isn't it?
Well, reform it rather than getting rid of it altogether. That is policy. The idea being that any money that would be saved from those reforms, if there is money to be saved, would be reinvested in college and school transport, which is where the majority of EMA funding actually goes to. That was why EMA funding was brought in the first place, was to help with those costs. So we are talking about reforming EMA, and any savings made would be reinvested into school transport. It wouldn't go anywhere else. That money wouldn't go anywhere else. It would still be going to students at the end of the day, but in a different way.
Thanks very much. Next question. Sorry, there's so many to choose from. They're all very good. So I am tempted by the one that says, how will you encourage more young people to be interested in politics? But there perhaps might not be a manifesto commitment for that particular one. So, I mean, there is one that's perhaps particularly pertinent to today, given what's happened with Tata Steel and the kind of latest developments on that one. I wonder, Steffan, we could start with yourself. With this question, doesn't have a name attached to it, I'm afraid, but what does the panel think about government support for the steel industry, given that latest news, I don't know if you've heard it, is that there's a potential for a management buyout is the latest sort of development when it comes to the steel industry, which is, of course, Clanware, Port Talbot, Trostra up north, lots of other places in Wales, lots of other industries that depend on it, in fact.
Yeah, well, it's welcome news that there is a management buyout option that seems, on the face of it at least, to be credible. Plaid from the outset has said that government should intervene here. This is not just an industry, this is a way of life, and we know in this area what happens when you rip out the economic heart of a community. It never recovers. And if we lose the blast furnaces at Port Talbot especially, we won't see them reignited in our lifetimes. So they have to be kept burning. The management buyout, I think, would be better facilitated if there could be government support, and that, I think, should involve Welsh Government as well as UK Government. If Welsh Government is in a position to provide support in that sense, I think it would be worthwhile then looking at some sort of equity stake alongside management and employees as well, because there's a wealth of experience and knowledge in that area, and I think it would be a shame to lose it as we move forward. But this is representative, I think, in Wales now about where do we see our economy and our country going in the future. We've been sold a big lie that the financial service sector in the City of London was going to be this industry, so to speak, that was going to bring us all prosperity and a balanced economy and all the rest of it. It was a lie, it crashed, and we're all still paying for that crash. We need to go back to our old industrial base now. We need to revive our old industrial talents. We were good in Wales when we were using our brains and our hands. I think we should use the powers that we have now to become an economic and industrial powerhouse in our own right, in real industries like steel and so on and so forth. So I'm very encouraged by the news, and I hope that all parties and all governments can back this management buyout, and if it means that we as a public take a stake to make it happen, let's do it.
Thanks very much, Steffan. David, your thoughts on this? Just remind you of the question. What role should government have, essentially, in the steel industry, given the current circumstances?
Well, TUSC has been very clear from the beginning that government's role should be to nationalise Tata Steel. The steel industry is the last remaining major part of manufacturing left in Wales and in many ways the UK. And it is absolutely crucial to the Welsh economy and to Welsh communities that these plants remain. It is absolutely crucial. It's not just important, it is crucial to the future of our communities in South Wales. And we all know in these areas what it means when we lose a major industry. And of course we also know that the Tories don't give a damn about what happens in these areas. And incidentally, neither the Tories from Kent who stand on UKIP, on UKIP's late either, who are fundamentally and ideologically opposed to nationalisation. Why is nationalisation important? Because Tata is losing supposedly £1 million a day. And that's largely due to underinvestment. It's also due to the current situation in the world steel market, but I believe that if those plants were nationalised, the investment was put in that was being left out for the last 30 years, which should have been put in, and Nan Wern was fighting trying to get Comcast for 40 years. If the investment was put in, they would be competitive in the European market, and if the public procurement, the government was to buy the steel products that came from the publicly owned steel plants, then they would be viable. And therefore our communities would be viable, and we would still have a future for our young people with decent jobs, instead of sending them down to fast food restaurants on minimum wage, which is the alternative for young people. And nationalisation is the only way. A management buyout will have to have government support, and if we're going to be supporting it, then let's take it over.
The party in Westminster could have nationalised the steel industry, I suppose, if it really wanted to. Your response to some of those, accusations?
I think talking about nationalising the steel industry is actually incredibly irresponsible. A lot of people are saying, oh, the Tories bailed out bankers, the Tories bailed out bankers. Okay, that's fine. You can, okay. But let's look at how that bailout happened. RBS, when they were bailed out, they had a balance sheet of £2 trillion, which meant that our bailout was actually relatively secure. We've just heard that Tata Steel is losing £1 million a week. Why? So bailing it out is risking huge amounts of public money. Let's not forget that steel actually only makes up 0.1% of our GDP. So putting all of that money, risking all of that public money in nationalisation is actually not going to be the best thing for the country.
What about the effects on the people who were, and then still are, looking at losing their job, the effect on that community, the wider community? Is that not worth the inherent risk, the inherent expense of a business?
To be fair, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is what Welsh Conservatives are fighting for is more sensible approaches to making sure that those jobs are saved. The UK Conservative government is doing whatever it can to make sure that Tata continues. The Welsh government, if you'd like to listen to what I'm saying, the Welsh government, so the Welsh Conservatives, what we are saying is that we should be looking at minimum public procurement rules, so that a minimum amount of Welsh steel is being used in Welsh public procurement projects. Why hasn't that been done before? The steel industry has been declining for 25 years. This isn't something that just happened last year. It's been in decline for 25 years. What has happened? What was happening before then? Why wasn't something done before then? Why weren't business rates cut for the steel industry before then? Why weren't we looking at how we could get the energy prices down for these types of industries, so that we can secure those jobs, so that we don't have to go through this stress and the incredible stress that this must be causing for people who work in that industry?
Well, let's put some of those points to Rhianon and Passmore then. Rhianon, your party's been in power, shared power, or has led power, shall we say, for well over a decade. It perhaps could have stepped in earlier. There are levers it had to help the steel industry, and it didn't do it until it came to crunch time. Why was it?
Okay, three or four points there. I think, first of all, everybody is in agreement that Welsh Government has been, and I'll say everybody, but that is absolutely the case from my conversations at Llanwern last week, in terms of the action that is needed on high energy prices, the action that is needed on procurement at a UK level. I'll come into what Welsh Government has been doing in a second. And the action that is needed around maximum procurement of Welsh steel, not minimum procurement of Welsh steel. Firstly, I find it quite difficult to follow what the Conservative candidate has been putting forward. The UKIP members and the Conservative members of the European Parliament voted in 2015, in December. They voted against a level playing field on Chinese steel dumping. That was how many months ago? We have had this on the table for a long time. Now, with the greatest respect, the Welsh Government and the Welsh Labour Party involved in Welsh Government have been working their socks off with the Steel Task Force Group, petitioning UK Parliament gone by, well, the Conservative minister decides to go on holiday in Australia. I find it very, very rich. I find it very rich that I can be informed that there is no action from the Welsh Government. Outside of the Steel Task Force, Welsh Government has put aside £60 million to be able to work with British Steel. But this isn't an isolated thing. What we need is an industrial strategy that uses steel so that we can connect up a whole, not South East Wales economy, but a whole Welsh economy around an industrial strategy using steel so that it takes in energy like tidal lagoons across Wales.
How does a Welsh Labour government do that then? Does it change its procurement rules?
I think absolutely. We've been saying for a long time that we need to be working with the UK government on procurement and working in using as much steel from Wales as we possibly can. But we need a joined up and coordinated approach with the UK government in terms of the lack of announcement, for instance, on the Swansea tidal lagoon. We need to be working together, and today we've had some shift on the way forward, but quite frankly, it's not enough in my view.
Isn't it, just to point out, the Minister, I think, was on a trade mission rather than a holiday to Australia. So we're told. In terms of what Welsh Labour could do or could commit to doing going forward, there's what, £60 million, I think, Carbon Jones has said
£60
on
million on the table.
What will you guarantee people going forward for the steel industry, which actually is important to this area as much as anywhere else, because we're in this part of Wales that benefits from it?
I think, quite frankly, what we need to be doing is working with the UK government at a European level, and obviously Mark Wreckless can come in on this in terms of his party's position, but in terms of how we look at high energy prices across the board, and if we look at what other countries have done on this, around France in terms of their interventions, around Germany and Italy, who are, by the way, subsidising in part some of their steel industry.
So Welsh Labour will buy more Welsh steel?
Welsh Labour categorically has been saying for a very long time we need a coordinated industrial strategy which uses Welsh steel. That is nothing new. It has been on the table for a very long time, and we need a coordinated approach with the UK government, not a piecemeal, oh, we'll do a little bit of co-investment. We need a proper strategy because there are real livelihoods on the line who need to know every day that passes, you know, that's time that's going and ticking.
All right. Mark Wreckless, we mentioned Europe there, so it seems only right to ask you a question, given it's your specialist topic. In terms of the debate on government support for the steel industry, where does UKIP stand on that? A co-investor or a full bailout? Where do you stand on that? Just to bring it back to the question, which is government support as opposed to wider issues. Where do you stand?
Well, to answer the questions raised by the Labour and Conservative representatives as to why weren't we insisting on public procurement of Welsh or UK steel, why weren't we relieving the business rates, why weren't we reducing energy costs, the answer to all three are that the European Union will not let us. There is a public procurement directive, and that requires every procurement by a public sector body above a certain relatively low hurdle amount to be advertised on an equal basis across the European Union.
It is possible to specify British steel if you wanted to. For example, Network Rail use a lot of British steel.
They are incredibly minor and enormously difficult to access carve-outs to
Other countries do it.
They are very, very minimal. In terms of state aid, £10 million is the business rates on that Port Talbot site currently. The maximum the European Union would allow the Welsh Government to give in relief is £58,000. That is how we are constrained. If you look at the energy market, the EU Renewables Directive, the Climate Change Levy, the Carbon Tax, the Large Combustion Plants Directive that shut down our coal plants, and the Domestic Emissions Performance Standard, which bans new coal-fired power stations, even though they're building them in Germany, has driven energy prices up to a level at which we are uncompetitive against Chinese steel.
Are you saying there's nothing that government can do here then to help or assist in some way the steel industry? Are we completely constrained, completely held back by
after the 23rd of June, if we vote to leave the European Union, there is an awful amount the government can do. And UKIP believes that we should safeguard the steel industry at least through the 23rd of June, because if we vote to leave, there could be a sustainable future for our steel industry where we cut energy prices, where we relieve the business rates, and where we have the opportunity to buy British steel where we choose in our democratically elected assembly and parliament to do so.
Well, a glimpse into the future there for another form of democratically elected, well, not democratically elected people, but a chance to make your voice heard in the referendum the following month. Brendon de Cruz, where do you stand on government support for the steel industry? And let's try and steer away from the EU if we possibly can.
It has been a bit of a distraction, hasn't it, this EU stuff while we're trying to campaign on the Welsh Assembly. I think a lot of the points have been made already about the need for better procurement, the need for tariffs potentially to stop the Chinese dumping. I'm going to focus on sort of employees and making sure that if they are losing their jobs, that we're thinking about what sorts of things they could be doing instead of going onto the dole. In my day job, I'm a project manager. I work with Crossrail and others, and you know, the steel industry is so important to the UK. We need to make sure that we are using Welsh steel, British steel for our own infrastructure projects, to build the houses that we need to build the wind turbines that we won't want. There is a real need for all of this. I don't want to play the blame game. I've heard here, you know, blame the Conservatives, blame Labour. You know, I'm actually going to blame the steel industry for not being innovative enough to think about what sorts of things that need to go in there.
I think people in Portobello would say they've been quite innovative. Tata spent an awful lot of money on a blast furnace. The workers are said to be very, very highly skilled.
But I want to think about what happens next and to stop this happening again. And to think about how we restructure the industry so that we can kind of do it. Yes, too late, but you know, kind of I feel for those people who are now having to think about their jobs. Management buyout, great, but ultimately we need the steel industry. That's it.
How does a government support that, and how does a Welsh government, in fact, support that?
I think there needs to be intervention from both the Welsh government and the Conservative government in Westminster. And I think because of the way in which things work and the fact that they don't easily talk to each other, you know, it is problematic. I'm optimistic that there will be a solution, yeah, that you know, people will be able to look forward, but I couldn't give you that because we're not in power, we're not influenced.
You don't have a policy in terms of how a Welsh government, or how a Welsh government you would have a part in would support the steel industry?
Yeah, we would support. We would put money into the steel industry to make sure that it's sustainable.
Okay. Right. Last but not least, Pippa Bartollotti, steel industry. How does a government support it, if at all?
Right, well, we've known since 2005 that the Chinese subsidies were rising, and they were rising at the same pace as exports of Chinese steel. So we've known that this was something waiting to happen since 2005. I've known it, I'm sure the governments have known it. So no action has been taken. I have spoken to both directors at Port Talbot and also workers, so I know what's on their minds. I want to tell you first of all that even the workers will admit that the days of the old blast furnaces are really truly numbered. You cannot have infinite growth in a finite world. There is enough steel in this world to recycle again and again without making any new, and that's just a fact. The smart money is on arc furnaces, not blast furnaces. The trade unions will agree, and the directors also know. I'll also tell you...
These are just to clarify, these are the furnaces that take recycled metal rather than iron ore and
these are the ones that Liverpool Steel in Newport are using currently. Well,
how does the government support that then? Does it come in and take it over and say, right, we will now take all your cans, we'll recycle them and we'll have it as our industry, or not?
Don't talk to me about government. I'll tell you something.
Are you sure?
Government, yeah.
I thought that's where you wanted to be. in the wrong room.
Government have been buying steel for frigates from Sweden. Government have been buying steel from tanks from Germany. I've got to tell you, our government has been hammering nails in Welsh steel industry for years.
So you changed procurement rules, is what you're saying, is it?
Well, first of all, the procurement rules, the EU directive, the procurement directive of 2014, allowed for goods to be procured on cost, also economic and social grounds. The UK government did not support the social and economic part of this directive, only on cost. We have been let down, and our workers have been let down. We need a steel industry, and just to put some rumours to rest, only 1% of the energy bills coming out of Port Talbot are actually what so-called eco-taxes. It's not a make or break tax. We have a serious problem with getting our own governments to invest in our own industry. I should hate to see the demise of steel. Llanwern, Talbot, in the UK, wherever, we need steel. But the smart money is on those arc furnaces. And I'm sorry to say, I'll just say one more thing, please. We really do need to be aware that in Amsterdam, Tata have invested hugely in their research and development and the premises there. People would say that who've been to both Port Talbot and to Amsterdam plants, that Port Talbot is a bit of a dump. It hasn't had a lot of investment for quite a while, and I think our elected representatives should have been aware of this. If I am, they should have been. I'm horrified at the way steel's being let down. I know government can do more, and I feel also that if these people were to lose their jobs, heaven forfend, if they were to lose their jobs, it would cost us more to keep them unemployed than it would to keep them employed. So
I'm a little unclear though. You want to keep them all employed, but arc furnaces by definition don't employ as many people as the furnaces that are at Port Talbot at the moment.
They need cheap electricity.
There's real business to be had in steel. If the Chinese are subsidising and dumping, and we've let that happen, then we've got to stop. We've got to change procurement rules, and British companies have to buy British steel. That is the end of it.
Okay. So thanks very much. Well, I'll move on. I'm wary that we've only got about sort of 15, 20 minutes to go, and I've really not covered very many questions, so that's entirely my fault. Sorry, I'm letting everyone talk for too long, I think. Very briefly, there's a question here that says, would members of the panel agree with me, and I didn't write this, someone else did, when I say that the living wage should be a step up for Britain and not just those over 25. I wonder whether you could touch on some job policies here as well. We've not had a question specifically asking about job creation, but I guess the two are related. The living wage, which well, David will clarify. I think it's £7.20, isn't it, the living wage? So the UK government tells us at least.
The minimum wage, not a living wage.
Well, quite.
The living wage is not a living wage.
The definition of it has been. Yeah, we'll see.
Trying to change it.
Should the living wage be a step up for Britain? So basically, should we be looking at higher wages for those below 25 as well as those above 25? David?
Absolutely, yes. I was on a protest 2 weeks ago when they introduced the so-called, and I use the word so-called living wage, which most people cannot live on, and still, if you've got a family, you will have to rely on tax credits to survive. So living wage, I use in inverted commas. I was on a protest of young people who were demanding that they get the same. And it wasn't just the under 25s who were protesting. Because of course, if you're 26 and you're working in a 0-hour contract workplace, then who's the boss going to employ? You on £7.25 or the young worker who's on just over £6? They're going to employ the younger worker on £6. So it doesn't just affect those who are under 25, it also affects those over 25 who are probably not going to get as much work as a result of this discriminatory living wage that's been brought in. And I completely agree with the question. It should be a living wage, a real living wage, a minimum wage which we are campaigning for alongside key unions like the GMB, the RMT, the Bakers Union, for £10 an hour minimum wage that people can afford to live on. Now, where will the money come from? Where will we get the money from?
And how could a Welsh government be involved in that? I guess again, back to procurement again.
For a start off, the Welsh Assembly could pass a motion saying that there should be a minimum wage of £10 an hour. That might not actually implement it, but it's a big step in that direction. The second point is that it can establish that as the standard for Welsh public services. It can say that that's what should be the case in the Welsh public sector. That's what it does have an influence over. And how will it be paid for? It will be paid for from the billions of profits that are currently being made. In this period of austerity, we have had the lowest wage growth for 150 years in Britain. And at the same time, surprise, surprise, the rich are twice as rich as they were at the start of austerity. That's really what the tax was. And the reason the minimum wage has been kept so low is because, of course, it's a way of keeping profits up. And it's not the working class people who benefit from that. It hasn't benefited in terms of jobs. And incidentally, this is an international movement. In the United States, Bernie Sanders is standing on $50 a minimum wage, and he's getting new support, and they're beginning to implement it because they're getting socialists elected in councils in the United States. And you can do it in the United States, then for God's sake, we can do it in this country.
Probably not the first time I've said Bernie Sanders will get Pippa, back to yourself. The living wage should be a step up for Britain, the card says here, not just for those over 25. Is it realistic, I guess, to expect everyone of working age to receive £8 an hour, £7.20 an hour, £10 an hour, perhaps? Is that
Yes,
affordable given the current
It is.
situation?
Now, I spent a lot of my years working for the WDA, going into businesses around Wales. My job was to help them grow. Now, I'm telling you straight, if a business cannot afford to pay a living wage, a real living wage, not this cardboard replica we've been sold at the moment, if a business can't afford to pay you that, then there's something wrong with its business model. All right? Now, I'm talking to you as people living here. You know, part of this is down to you too. It's your job to buy as locally as possibly, to keep our own jobs here, from our furniture makers to our dressmakers.
Does government have a role in this? Just briefly.
Yes, government does have a role. The Greens policy is for a citizen's income, which at the moment, or at least worked out at the last election, was about £81 a week.
Give everybody 81
For everyone, rich and poor, because the rich will be taxed and the money will come back through taxation. But it means everybody, by virtue of being a citizen, has enough money to feed themselves and to clothe themselves and to look after themselves. And this would be for all. It would be slightly lower for a child, but over 18s would all be treated exactly the same. Now, this is
that's a nice clear way to end it. We know where you stand on that.
I really want to say something else.
I'll have to move on, because otherwise, if everyone goes over by 30 seconds, we'll be here till midnight. Thank you. Rhianon, just briefly, pay the minimum wage, or minimum wage or living wage, whichever way you want to look at it, more money, at least, to those under 25 as well as those over 25. I presume you think that's a good idea.
I think in terms of what has already been said, there's a consensus so far across the panel that this is what we need to be doing. And as part of Welsh Labour's manifesto, we will be accelerating the growth of the minimum wage. Why? Because it's good for people. And what isn't good for people is when we have a hike on VAT, which affects the poorest most disproportionately, or we have a hike on national insurance, which absolutely punishes those at the bottom of the scale. And in terms of everything that is affecting wages and the stagnation of wages, this is going to help. However, I would actually say, moving forward, it is Welsh Labour that also recognises that it isn't just about a minimum wage. It is about effective taxation and effective rebate. And quite frankly, one of our pledges moving forward, I think is going to make a big difference for the people of Wales, taking 3/4 of small businesses out of business rates and halving it for the rest so that they pay nothing. So it isn't just about one thing. It is about getting it right in terms of taxation across the board, and it is about being fair to people, so that the top 1%, who Mark Wreckless has agreed through his voting record in Europe, so that they don't get taxed, and so that we keep the tax havens, so that we don't tax the bankers' bonuses by easing the regulation. You know, this is what we need to
We're
outline.
going slightly outside the
I
remit
may
of what
be.
the Assembly is possible.
I may be,
admire your
but
passion
it's
for it,
joined
but it's,
up, isn't it, everyone? It's a joined up approach, and it is about working together for the best system for everybody.
and maybe sometimes the whole system involved as well. But right to have aspirations for it, certainly. Where are we? Brendon the Cruise. More money for people under the age of 25. I don't think anyone's going to turn that down, but pragmatically, how do you ensure that happens?
I work for a social enterprise, and we've had to raise the wages of the people that work there. We get some very, very good people who are under 25 who are perfectly able to earn more, but we don't have to give it to them. Whereas if they're over 25, they automatically have to reach that. And it has been really problematic where, you know, companies where funding is not as available as, say, large corporations. It has caused us to think about, you know, whether or not we can actually sustain some of those jobs. So, you know, from a Liberal Democrat perspective, we are obviously in favour of raising the tax threshold, allowing people to keep more of the money that they actually earn, and certainly the Tories are now passing that policy off as their own, but that was in our manifesto and we delivered that in coalition, and we'd like to see that go higher and higher. We're not opposed to a living wage, it's just what that should be and the impact on small businesses, and I'm actually in agreement with Rhianon here in that we have to look at things like business rates. Our policy is to use a Welsh Development Bank to actually help fund smaller businesses in terms of making them more amenable to growth and opportunities like that. I do think that there is consensus from part of this panel, but you know, I wouldn't say that the living wage on its own is going to be the panacea. I think it does need to be thought about in the bigger picture in terms of what people earn and what they keep and what they spend it on.
In terms, we've talked about living wage, and the gentleman rightly pointed out that actually there's plenty of people who disagree with the current Chancellor's view on what a living wage is. He's been pulled up on it before. It's down to your perception, I suppose, of what a living wage is and what it isn't. I think £8.25 outside London, is that right, Dave? Is that the most recent, the Living Wage Foundation, I think? Is
It
around?
won't be rising this year.
Yeah.
The European decency threshold is £10 an hour.
So there's £10 an hour, there's £8 an hour, there's differences in London and outside London. Any reason why those under 25 shouldn't be paid £8 odd an hour as it stands, or are there good business reasons, or are there good reasons for government not being too sort of determined to get that hourly rate up?
I believe in equality and fairness, and if people are doing a particular job, it doesn't matter how old they are. You know, fundamentally, that we are allowed to discriminate based on age because of the way in which it works. But if people are doing a particular job, then they should be remunerated for that. That's the principle for me, and I would stand by that.
Okay. Elizabeth Simon, your views on this idea of a step up for Britain rather than just a step up for the over 25s, and I guess the context of this is, in a Welsh context, what could the future Welsh government do, or what could the Assembly as a whole do to put pressure on firms or otherwise to achieve it, or perhaps you don't think it's necessarily a brilliant idea?
Make under 25s work for free.
Some of them do already.
Yes.
Not fair.
I really understand the question. It's not that long ago that I was under 25, and if this had come out then, I would have been really annoyed. So I'm not going to say anything else other than that I understand the question and I understand the frustrations with it. The reason why I think it's been done is from a feasibility point of view. We've already heard that some businesses, particularly the small businesses in Wales, which make up such a big part of our economy, are really going to struggle with paying this living wage. And I believe that the reason why it's been changed for people who are over 25 compared to people under 25 is just from that feasibility point of view and trying to make it more affordable for some of the companies that are really going to struggle with it. But I agree that it would be brilliant if we could bring it in for everybody, regardless of age. I completely agree with what's just been said, that if you're doing the same job, age shouldn't come into it. That's absolutely right. But as I say, the reason why I think it's been brought in this way is from a feasibility point of view. I've been running businesses for a long time now, and it doesn't matter how good your business model is, it's very expensive to employ somebody. You can't get away from that. That is just fact. It's very, very expensive to have staff. That's why Welsh Conservatives have been fighting for business rates to be cut for years now. We've been talking about small businesses having rate relief so that they've got more money in the bank to be able to pay more salaries. We've also, the UK Conservative government has also increased the employer's allowance, which means that employers pay less national insurance per employee. which saves about £6,000 a year at the moment, that's £6,000 more that those companies can spend employing people. It breaks down those barriers to why it's so expensive to have staff. So that's what we would want to do. We've campaigned for a long time to get business rates cut. We are continuing to cut the employer's allowance, as I say, or to increase the employer's allowance, I should say.
From a Welsh context, though, anything that a Welsh government, government generally in Wales could do to achieve this? Because certainly some councils have already committed to paying the £7.20 rate an hour, whatever you'd like to call it. Any commitment from that, from the Welsh Conservatives' perspective?
Obviously, we absolutely encourage that. Any company who can do it sooner than the law says and at a higher rate is absolutely encouraged. As I said, from a Welsh point of view, we want to see business rates cut so that there's more money in those small businesses. We want to be encouraging more and more businesses to come here and open up in Wales so that we've got more jobs, more money in the economy in Wales to be able to stimulate all of that.
Okay. Mark Wreckless, giving those under 25 the chance to earn a minimum wage, a living wage, whatever you'd like to call it, never sounds like a bad idea, does it? Would you commit to doing that as a party to ensuring perhaps councils, the NHS, others paid a minimum wage, shall we call it, at least £7.20 an hour, £8 an hour, £10 an hour? What would you commit to?
I think we should make progress on that. One thing I did during the last Westminster Parliament, actually look at my record perhaps rather than what Rhianon characterised it as, was to campaign for an increase in the minimum wage. And I did that through that Parliament. And one argument I made was the Low Pay Commission, this quango that was recommending it. It was time that democratically elected politicians took control and actually said, no, we can be more ambitious than this and raise it faster than that quango was saying. At the general election, Ed Miliband said he was going to raise it to £8 an hour by 2020. And I think many of us were quite surprised, and I do think some credit should be given here because it wasn't what people were expecting. Despite Labour saying it was going to be £8 an hour by the end of this Parliament, we now see the Conservatives saying it's going to be £9 an hour by the end of this Parliament. But only for over 25s.
And it sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But of course, in a few years' time, £9 an hour won't really mean £9 an hour, if you know what I mean, because inflation, well...
But it will still be quite a lot higher than it would
some.
otherwise have been. It's higher than Labour was saying at the last election, and I think it would be a good thing to see that wage rise. The reason we hasn't done this before is there is a trade-off between very high minimum wage rates, saying it's illegal to pay someone unless you pay them at least this amount. The risk is that may affect employment opportunities, and it is particularly more of a risk for younger people who haven't had the experience in the labour market. And where we see very restrictive labour laws, say in southern Europe, we see a quarter, sometimes half, of young people who are out of work, and we don't want that.
So are you saying yes to the under 25 question or not?
This year we are seeing for over 25s going £7.20 and staying at about £6.50 or so for people between 21 and 25, and then tiered lower than that. I think if, as the government said, it goes to £9 by the end of the Parliament, I don't think it's sustainable just to keep the minimum wage for 21 to 25-year-olds drifting up a bit from £6.50. I think you would want to see steps to push that higher as well, albeit you might not push it quite as high as you are for over 25, because it's absolutely essential that younger people have the opportunity to work and get the experience in the workforce so they can get the wage rises later.
Okay. We were so close to consensus there. But there we are. Lastly,
can I make a point on this? Yeah.
What's that?
If you raise up to a proper living wage at £10 an hour, you see the government saves the money from the tax credits that it doesn't have to pay.
Okay.
You have people low paid are paying taxes, they feel more human, they feel more important, and then you can use that money to subsidise the employers that can't afford it. Simple economics.
There we are. And a popular policy, no doubt. I expect the realities and pressures of government might have something to do why people haven't already committed to that, but there we are. Last but not least, Steffan Lewis, Plaid Cymru. You've been a fan of living wages and those types of policies for quite a long time. Time to get rid of the difference between an under 25 worker and an over 25.
Absolutely. It always astounds me how we always seem to find money for invading countries workers, but we can't find a way to I am against discrimination in terms of people's wages, and I very much resent the fact that the UK government, the Tory government, decides to call this pay increase a living wage. It is not a living wage, as has been pointed out. There is another set living wage, the Low Pay Commission has set out. But in terms of the specific Welsh context, wages are very important, and low wages are sadly a key feature of the Welsh economy. You know, our average wages in Wales are 15% below the UK average. And that tells us an awful lot about what we need to know about the British state and how it operates. The British state is a centralised, multinational state that has sucked and bled industry, talent, away from places like Wales and the north of England and elsewhere, and has concentrated it in the city of London. And few people have done very, very well out of the boom in the financial service sector in the city of London. It's no surprise that bankers' bonuses are now back up to the pre-crash levels, and we're having a row about whether under 25-year-olds should be paid a living wage. It's a disgrace.
Is there a manifesto commitment for that in terms of government-run services to commit to doing that as well?
Well, the public sector, of course, has got to lead, as it always has done when it comes to progressive policies, when it comes to wages and rights in the workplace. But the private sector has to follow too. But what I would say crucially is that if we are going to look to Westminster or to the UK to deliver for us an economic policy and a wage policy and an industrial policy that's going to be good for us, I'm afraid we're going to be waiting a very long time. It's up to us now to use the devolution system that we've got, however imperfect that it is, and whatever disagreements that we've got among ourselves. It's up to us now to make Wales the country we know it can be. And that means building new industries. We talked about steel today. We talked about young people and skills and using further and higher education as tools for people to be able to command high-skilled, high-paid work. Because hopefully in 15 years' time or in 20 years' time, we won't be talking so much about minimum wages and living wages, because we'll be commanding well-paid work in this country like we used to do 30, 40, 50 years ago. But that comes from us coming together and deciding upon our own economic policy in this country that diverges away from the mess and the inequality that is happening over the border.
Right, so one second. Right, I've got two questions I want to get in before the end. Apologies for letting everyone rabbit on too long. That's been my fault, which is why we're nearly at an end. Or in fact, I think we're already over the time. But very, very briefly, starting with the Rhianon, there's a question here from Gary Johnson. Gary, do you want me to? We've already heard from Gary. Gary, do you want to read out your question, or do you want me to?
I can ask it.
And we need 10 or 15 second answers. We need proper BBC sound bites from you all now.
I travel over the bridge quite often, weekly at least, and I want to know, where is the money going to come to maintain the bridges if you get rid of the tolls?
So firstly, I guess, will you get rid of the tolls? And secondly, how are you going to fund the maintenance of the bridge going forward in about 2 years' time, roughly, comes into public ownership? Rhianon, very briefly, if you could.
Okay. I think, first of all, obviously at the moment it's not in our gift, it's in the Chancellor's, and there's obviously movement now in terms of where that moves. In 2 years' time, I think quite fundamentally we need to secure, and I will lobby very much, because I'm sure everybody in this room knows, but this is one of the most expensive tolls, not in Europe, but globally, apart from Japan. Per mile, we are paying a ludicrous amount on this toll. Absolutely ridiculous. He wants a soundbite. So yes, I will be lobbying extremely hard to be able to say that we want that revenue protected, so that we can actually have that £1.50 limit on that toll, and that will be absolutely clear. That is a tariff from the UK at this moment in time against Welsh business. We've got to do it.
Elizabeth, I guess there's a sort of line halfway between the Severn Bridge and between us and Bristol. Would you get rid of the 7 tolls altogether? Would you reduce them? And how would you pay for the maintenance going forward in 2 years' time?
We've committed to halving the tolls once they revert to public ownership. That's why I wasn't able to do it earlier, because it's not in public ownership at the moment, but as soon as it does, they will be halved straight away, immediately. If you're concerned about how the maintenance is going to be paid for, an independent review was done, I think, last year, possibly the year before, that calculated based on the number of cars, lorries, vans, etc. that go through there every day, you would only need 50p per person to pay for the actual maintenance costs. So that's an independent report. It's not the Tories, it's not Labour, I'm not making this up. I would suggest that you Google it. If you Google David Davis MP Severn Bridge tolls, he mentions the report.
Tell us what you would do then. Would you get rid of them altogether? Would you reduce them? And how would you pay for the maintenance going forward?
Well, as I said, at the moment, we have pledged to reduce the tolls by half as soon as they revert to public ownership.
And that helps pay for for the
more than
maintenance.
enough. Well, that's more than enough to pay for the
Okay.
maintenance.
That sounds good. Well, not policy, but it sounds good in terms of its length. Mark, Steffan Lewis, sorry.
Yeah, well, when they revert to public ownership in a couple of years' time, even though they're not going to be coming into Welsh public ownership, they'll be British public ownership, we will still be in a position, based on the report that's been alluded to be able to cover maintenance costs from Barnet consequential shares, and that's why Plaid Cymru will abolish the 7 tolls for all Welsh residents.
Are you sure you're getting that money from them now?
Well,
We'll see.
That is the thing you're saying, you're hoping to get it through Parliament.
We'll see. Well, we're dealing in promises and pledges here, aren't we?
If not, though, the sums that we are talking about would mean that it would be affordable for the next Welsh government to abolish them for every Welsh citizen if there's a political will to do it. It's all about political priorities, and I think that's an important economic
David Reid, the bridge, what do you do with it?
Well, just as a very quick passing point, it just shows the dangers of PFI, because that was basically built under PFI. And we have paid way over what it has cost to in tolls on that bridge. My position is, if you build a road from A to B, you shouldn't have to pay to use the road, regardless of whether it goes over a mountain, over a river, through a tunnel or whatever. It should be the same as the postage. You don't pay an extra 6p because it's going over a mountain.
So free tolls, how do you pay for the maintenance?
And it should come from the same place as we pay for all the rest of the roads that go around the UK, that go through mountains, through tunnels, around places with different roads that have to go around towns.
Excellent.
And so on.
Nice and
They don't
straightforward.
have to pay extra because it goes around their town. To have to pay to come into the country, I've always found is a bit annoying.
Okay.
And I think I agree with Steffan really. The Welsh government should have that as included in its budget.
Okay. Pippa, your views on the Severn Bridge?
You know, it penalises commuters horribly. Now, I don't actually know what the maintenance costs are, but they are in the region of about 50p a trip. And so I think that the user should pay enough to cover the maintenance. But...
So 50p, reduce the toll to 50p.
Well, I'm not saying 50p, to cover the maintenance, whatever that ends up being, because it's not actually in the public domain, although some research has been done. But I will also say that Greens would make it toll-free for low emissions vehicles and electric vehicles.
Great.
So
we'll leave it there.
we get a
We need
win-win,
to move on to
okay?
the very last question, because I'm already a couple of minutes over and everyone's going to have a say before we go home. Final question. Sorry, Brendon, your view very briefly on the Severn toll.
Okay, the reason that the tolls are there is because of the franchise and the need to pay back the cost of building it, maintaining it, etc. It's a French company, but they employ British people, good for them. Once it comes into public ownership, we would scrap it completely, okay? Because it deters businesses, it penalises commuters. The whole Cardiff, Newport, Bristol, all of that there needs to be opened up so that we can get more travel, more kind of opportunities in there. And fundamentally, the answer was from Dave. I think they kind of, who pays for all of our other roads and bridges, etc. It should revert to the Highways Agency and then be funded through vehicle taxation and things like that.
Please. You're not a forgettable man, Mark, but I nearly forgot you. You're in
The tolls were there to pay for the construction of the bridge. The company is going to be paid back and more by the end of next year. It is an outrage that the Conservative government is saying that tolls should then continue and go as a tax to the Conservative government in Westminster. They should be scrapped at the end of next year. Any maintenance cost UKIP would pay for by taking the money from the fastest rising part of the Welsh Government budget, which goes up by 50% from 48 million last year to 73 million this year, and that is the budget for climate change projects.
There we are. I do have one final question to ask, but I'm going to have to boil it down to just a yes or a no. It's a question from Rob, who helped organise this evening. Rob's a big supporter of the Cwmcarn Forest Drive, which I'm sure everyone who lives around this way will know it. I've been speaking to him about it for the last, 18 months or so. He's done a lot of work to try and make sure it's at the top of various political agendas. So just in your closing, if I can give you 60 seconds each just to close the session here. Mark, if you're not aware of it specifically, it's a forest drive which, because of some diseases to the trees, they've had to cut back lots of the trees. It was a real shame, but a necessity really to stop the spread of Phytophthora ramorum. I think I've got the there was some suggestion that perhaps it might not reopen, and it probably isn't going to reopen in the way that it was. So I guess the question is, would your party commit to reopening it, I guess, regardless of cost, because there probably will be an increased cost to open it up. So if we can start in the reverse order that we started with. So Mark, if you want to go first, and we'll work our way back.
All I can say is, on my own behalf, if I'm elected as an Assembly member for South East Wales, I will work with you on this issue and to understand its advantages, to see what we can do for obviously what is an extraordinarily valued thing. And thank you for all your work to do it, and I look forward, hopefully, to working with you after me.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Rhianon, you'll be well aware of Cumcan Forest Drive, I'm sure. If you give your answer on that and your closing remarks, please.
Absolutely, we will be working 100% to open it, and in coordination with a wider strategy, so that we make this not just a regional tourist hub, which it is at the moment, but a national and international tourist hub. There are too many jobs and training opportunities, too much natural history, too much environmental beauty to let that go to waste.
Brendon, your views.
As Rob knows, Matthew Kidner, who's standing here in Islwyn, and I have been part of the meetings that have been held, and we're completely supportive of the need to kind of keep this particular part of Islwyn and the areas open. So yeah, definitely, totally committed to that. And I hope you make the right choice when you come to voting in a couple of weeks' time.
We will.
David, your views and your closing comments, please.
Yes, I definitely support reopening the Cumcan Scenic Drive. I miss going up to Tumbalum to look over the valleys, and when I look over these valleys, I remember the traditions that we have kept going, the fact that the health service was born in these valleys, and I remember as well that I think we should keep that tradition going, and I think it would be a disaster, therefore, if on the second vote, if people were to vote out of disillusionment with politics for a candidate for UKIP who are led by people who support the ideas of Margaret Thatcher. And Mark, you asked to be judged on your record. You supported a motion to rename an airport in the UK after Margaret Thatcher. You asked Parliament, and I tell you what, one of the reasons I wanted to stand in this election is if people are disillusioned with politics, they should vote for a socialist, for a trade unionist and socialist coalition on the second vote, and not use their disillusionment to vote for Thatcherites, who represent the opposite of everything this community has ever
Pippa, your views on the Cumcan Forest Drive and your closing remarks, please, very briefly, if you could.
If you had a Green in the Senedd, the large monoculture plantation would never have happened. It was a tragic, stupid mistake to plant a non-native species that when disease hits one, it hits all. And that's why we're in this position, because we haven't thought about the future.
Will you definitely reopen it, no matter the
I would definitely reopen it, but first I would make sure it's planted with native, indigenous, deciduous trees, fruit trees, nut trees, berry trees, for increase the wildlife, bring red squirrels down to us, make it a fantastic place to go. And I cannot think why such a mistake was made in the first place. And I think that the amount of traffic that we could create in terms of eco-tourism, I'm not particularly talking about cars, we could have electric cars and charging points, we could do all sorts of things to make that a really healthy place to go. And just to sort of sum up, yeah, you say I could have a last minute.
the last couple of minutes, really. Last sentence.
It's a new world. We need a new government. We need a new way of doing things. We're making votes for our children. We're voting for the future. If you vote for the same old thing, you'll get, guess what, the same old thing. I'm asking you to vote Green because it is a new world.
Okay.
Because we do stand for something different, and please go to our website and read something about us, because if you've never voted Green before, now's your time to make history.
Thanks very much, Pippa.
for all the work on Cumcan. It's a jewel in the crown for this area, and it has to be retained. And I would certainly commit myself, if I'm elected to our National Assembly, to work with your group, your organisation, all parties, in order to secure a future for it. I used to be taken up there when I was a nipper. I became a dad quite recently, and I'm looking forward to taking my nipper up there to enjoy the views. And in terms of looking further ahead to the next fortnight and the big decision you have to make, I didn't get involved in politics because I enjoy slanging matches or the partisan fallouts. I got involved in politics because, quite simply, I believe in two things: my community and my country. And we waited 600 years for our country to have a parliament of its own, and I very much hope that you put your faith in people who want to make that parliament work in the best interest of our country and in the best interest of future generations, so that we don't have to go through the 600 years that we went through without a voice, without a government, without home rule. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steffan. We have got literally one sentence, because we try and keep track of time, and you have had your fair share. So literally one sentence to end us, and then we'll finish on Elizabeth.
Very simply, as a closing remark, 'cause I misunderstood what I was doing a second ago. Very, very simply, we're at the cusp of the most important election that will decide the shape and the policy basin of Wales for the next generation. It is too important to throw away the progress that we are making by voting for right-wing ideologies.
And the last word to Elizabeth Salmon from the Welsh Conservative.
With regards to the area that we were just discussing, Cumcan, I obviously not the candidate for this area, but I know that Paul is fully supportive of whatever can be done to keep that open. We've heard it's far too vital to the economy around here, to the jobs, tourism, all of that. The Welsh Conservatives are committed to promoting tourism, so we would be committed equally to helping this area reopen and do whatever it takes for the local community. In terms of closing remarks, I'd just like to say thank you for showing so much interest and for coming.
Great stuff. I can certainly have to remark about showing interest, and deep apologies for keeping you way over time.
Thanks.
All right. Okay.
Is that it? No,
yeah, that's it. That's me definitely done. Yeah,
okay.
I've overstayed my welcome.
Thanks from the chair of Old Politics Society.
Right, yeah, just want to say thank you. I'd just like to say a big thank you to our panel members, and for taking your valuable time out to come and see us and answer our questions, and hopefully, thank you to all for attending, and hopefully you've had an insight to what what each party stands for and what they can offer you, because these elections are very, very important, as mentioned before many times, and it's important that you make the right decision. Thank you very much.